Is it possible to end anxiety once and for all? Is it possible to overcome the fears, the doubts, and the limitations that sap your strength and destroy your confidence? And when anxious thoughts and feelings come that make you want to hide and escape, is there a way to eliminate them at their root so you don't numb out with medication or retreat into your shell, allowing them to control you while feeling like you're missing out on life? And how do you overcome anxiety? Is it even possible? Is true confidence just reserved for a select few, those lucky ones who are just born extroverts? And if it does exist, where do you find it? How can you develop it naturally so that you're able to go for it in life and express yourself with ease and confidence so that connecting with others doesn't feel like such a struggle? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover exactly what you need to do to overcome the fear of rejection and feeling like you're not good enough. How to stop feeling like you're missing out and get over that sense of not fitting in. And how to resolve the emotional traumas which leave you wondering, what's wrong with me? So you can really embrace opportunities to connect with people and really feel as if you're not only in control of your life, but that you have the confidence you desire in your relationships and in your work life, and take back the power which is your birthright so that you can truly become the captain of your own ship, the master of your life and your destiny. Hey guys, Ko Harlan here from Anxiety Destroyer, where I teach people like you how to unleash your confidence and stand out from the crowd and boldly charge forward into the future of your dreams. Now in this training, I'm going to talk about what are the top 5 problems that people with anxiety deal with on a regular basis, that limit them from expressing their true potential, and also what are the number 1 causes from which these problems stem. I'll explain where they come from and what is their root, so that we're not just dealing with the surface layer, of the symptoms, but I'll also talk about how we overcome them once and for all, so that we can powerfully move into the next phase of our lives with certainty, clarity, and freedom. So let's get started. Now, before we dive into the problems and causes of anxiety, I think it's important that we clearly define it. So, anxiety is often defined as a feeling of worry or nervousness or unease about a particular situation or an imminent event. It's also considered a desire to do something that's typically accompanied by a feeling of unease. And, the medical terminology usually refers to anxiety as a nervous disorder that's typically characterized by a state of excessive unease and apprehension. But the definition that I find to be much more accurate and actually useful is this. Anxiety is a disempowered and stressed mental emotional state, coinciding with a sense of lack of control and coupled with a strong desire to change it and an inability to do so effectively. So now that we've got a clear definition of what anxiety is, here are the top 5 problems people with anxiety are challenged by. Number 1 is worry. Worry is anxiety about the future. It manifests into questions like, how will I survive this? Or, what's going to happen when X, Y, Z? And, as we continuously imagine the worst, we become tormented by our own minds. Experiencing these imaginary tragedies repeatedly as if they'd actually happened. And this causes incredible stress in our bodies as our minds create nightmarish visions, and our brains go into overdrive, pumping toxins into our blood and creating a state of fear and immobilization. The number 2 cause is regret, and this problem can often keep you awake at night. Eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, your stomach turning and tied in knots. Regret is anxiety in disguise because it tells us that it will help us gain control. Regret causes you to relive your mistakes of the past over and over again, repeatedly punishing yourself and diminishing your self-worth. When I was stuck in regret, I would beat myself up in the hopes that the next opportunity I would do better. The problem is that regret is demoralizing, and it tends to reinforce the very behaviors that we'd like to change. So I'd end up asking questions like, what's wrong with me? Or, how could I have been so stupid? Or how could I let this happen? These disempowering questions, they do nothing to benefit us, and they only serve to further debilitate our sense of self-worth. Number 3, we have emotional suppression. Emotional suppression is an inability to process, let go of, or effectively express our difficult emotions. It's not only a problem, but it's one of the core underlying factors which causes anxiety. And the big problem with emotional suppression is that it robs us of the ability to really get in touch with these emotions while they're still manageable. And it leaves us prone to intense outbursts, where we explode for no apparent reason or react in a way that's completely disproportionate to the situation at hand. We wind up feeling taxed and overwhelmed, or perhaps worst of all, numb to the vast majority of colors within the emotional spectrum, and often we wind up, stuck in our heads. The fourth problem that I want to talk about is escapism or avoiding. Now, this symptom is what we experience when we're feeling insecure in who we are, and it's expressed as the need to hide from our problems or the world at large. Over time, this can evolve into the wearing of a social mask and can eventually lead us to feeling out of touch with who we really are. So we seek protection and comfort in various forms of escape, like, books. We lose ourselves in, TV binging. We ultimately become hyper introverted and, maybe escape into computers or video games or the like, or, worse yet, into drugs and alcohol abuse. And, that creates addictions which prevent us from developing the self-awareness which is necessary to transcend our problems. And so this creates layers of problems on top of problems on top of problems, and results in misdiagnoses and ineffective treatment strategies as symptoms stack upon symptoms and make it nearly impossible to distinguish cause from effect. So the number 5 problem that I'd like to talk about is the difficulty expressing or an inability to connect. And I saved this one for last because out of all the problems that are caused by anxiety, this one is perhaps the most saddening of all, because it leaves you feeling lost and alone, sucking the juice out of life and causing you to lead a life of quiet desperation. It can manifest as shyness, as being socially awkward, feeling misunderstood, or, just general malaise. And even if you have good people in your life, you often wonder what's missing. And the reason is human beings, we're social animals, and we thrive on our ability to create meaningful relationships and deep connections. And when we lack those relationships, or we fail to take the time to nurture them, either out of fear, insecurity, doubts, or simply not knowing how, we end up living a life devoid of meaning, and sometimes becoming jaded and even bitter as we watch the world around us and the people around us, as if we were an uninvolved bystander, a spectator instead of a participant. So if those are the top 5 symptoms of anxiety, worry, regret, emotional suppression, escapism, and an inability to connect, then what are their causes? It's not enough to identify the problem, though that is a good start. But if we can begin to understand the cause of the problem, then we can start to look for a solution. So the number 1 cause is fear of rejection. Fear of rejection is a traitor. It stunts our progress and short circuits our innate ability to grow through experience. It literally steals from us the very feedback which we so desperately need in order to iterate, take new actions, and learn from our mistakes. So we feel trapped inside of ourselves and we're unwilling to risk even the slightest disapproval from others. And so, quite naturally, we remain stuck. Life is about growth, and we grow through a simple process of action, yielding results from which we're able to draw conclusions. Then the more data we have, the more informed we will be, and the better equipped we'll be to create new beliefs, come up with better ideas, and take, armed with that knowledge, we can take new and empowered actions, which drive us forward. But when the fear of rejection is operating in our minds, we're no longer free to grow. Instead, we're like a puppet on a string with fear as our master. And, we're often told to just push through the fear. Just do it anyway. And while this is well-meaning advice and sometimes can be helpful, the problem here is that our actions are colored by our emotions. So when we're forcing ourselves to act in spite of fear, we almost always produce lackluster results, which in turn leads us to believe more and more in the second cause of anxiety, the belief that I'm just not good enough. I'm just not good enough. The big lie. You've certainly heard the phrase, the gift that keeps on giving. Well, this unwanted gift that was given to your mind, probably from the time you were very young, is like the lie that keeps on lying. Once this belief gets accepted by your subconscious mind through repetition and coupled with negative emotion, it starts to become part of your identity. And when this happens, you're in serious trouble. But it's not powerful enough to harm you on its own. No thought or idea can do this without your permission. However, the problem is that these thoughts of not being good enough, or, I'll never be able to do this or that, or be like Johnny, they often they're often given to us rather, when we're small and defenseless. And they usually are subcommunicated to us by others when we were young and in an agitated emotional state. So they can slip right past our conscious mind's defenses, where they can easily lodge themselves into the subconscious, and they soon make up part of our overall psyche, becoming a complex and making us into a person who just isn't good enough. And maybe it happened when you were overlooked, when everyone else got invited to the party, or, you got picked last in dodgeball. Maybe you asked Mary out for a date or tried to kiss her and she just laughed at you. Or maybe you had an overbearing parent who made it seem as though the only way to win their love or approval was to be the best. Or suppose you had an older sibling that you just, couldn't compete with in some area. It literally could have been just about any circumstance. But what happened was you became upset or emotional, and then your mind, ever working to try to protect you, try to discover the reason for your failure or inadequacy. So when you looked for reasons as to why this happened, the simple answer, which seemed to be so obvious, arose. You're just not good enough. Some of us had even more traumatic upbringings where we were flat out told that there was something wrong with us. Or perhaps, like me, you were repeatedly asked by those who are supposed to be your protectors, "What's the matter with you?" Or even told, "I'm ashamed of you." Oh man, I got this one over and over again. You see, I was a bad kid. I was always getting into trouble and I didn't even know why. I knew I was smart, Yet I was constantly behaving impulsively and creating havoc in my life. And this pattern continued into, my young adulthood. I didn't want to accept that I wasn't good enough. I resisted that idea constantly, and I was always trying to prove to people and to myself that I was worthy. And strangely, this caused me to develop a bad boy mentality and, become something of a rebel. And it got me into all sorts of trouble. But, even though I was always acting like a badass, in my heart, I knew that I was no good, that something inside me was broken, and I could never give myself the love and approval that I so desperately needed. And having an older brother who was the world to me, but bullied me terribly while my parents, often did nothing, was certainly a factor in developing this complex. That I'm just not good enough. And, as was finding out from that same brother when I was like 5 or 6 years old that, I'd been adopted and that my real father was unknown to me. And this also led to a serious mistrust in adults, as they were found to not only be incapable of keeping me safe, but also they were liars. Now, I say all this not to feed into a story of victimhood. And certainly some of you watching this video now will have experienced far worse. But to show some examples of how anxiety was developed in me at a young age, and more importantly, to demonstrate that, with the right motivation and the emotional support and an effective plan, that anyone's capable of destroying their anxiety, developing their inner strength and unleashing the true confidence, which is your birthright, even you. And this brings us to the third cause of the problem of anxiety: control. As you probably have come to see, in many instances, these root causes are intertwined with one another and they create a tangled mess that, without a real depth of understanding and a potent strategy for their dissolution, it can be veritably impossible to change. And, this is why even the most well-meaning therapists and counselors, psychologists and shrinks, they're almost always just treating the symptoms. I hear this from my clients all the time. "I was in therapy for over a year. My therapist is really good. I like him a lot." And I ask them, "Well, why are you talking to me?" And they say, "Well, it helped, but it didn't really solve the issue." And this is because even the most effective treatments commonly used to deal with anxiety, they're only designed to affect change on the level of thought. It usually goes something like this: cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with the anxious thoughts, and pharmaceuticals to address the emotional issues. Now, though treatments working at the level of thought and beliefs, they do provide relief somewhat for people. But it's not enough to create true healing without simultaneously working to heal those deeper emotional wounds, which are at the root cause of anxiety. And quite contrary to popular belief, those drugs do nothing to heal emotional wounds. In fact, they do quite the opposite. They suppress emotions, which leaves the individual at an extreme disadvantage. Without the ability to contact those emotions from a place of safety and security and strength, and without the proper tools for knowing how to process, release, and heal those emotional wounds, you'll be forever subject to them. And no amount of logic will fix this. You're not going to be able to think your way out of it. And no amount of drugs will be able to suppress them without simultaneously creating a type of depression in which you become robbed of the zeal and joy of which life has to offer. Now, I'm not saying that those psychotropic drugs don't have their place or that they should never be used. Okay? In fact, if you have the choice between being suicidal and taking a drug, which will give you some relief, by all means, take the drug. But just realize that it's never going to resolve the issue at its core, and there will always be a cost involved. For true healing to occur, you will have to eventually develop the inner fortitude and resilience to face those emotions, and then to generate enough presence, self-awareness, and consciousness to dissolve them. And now the final root cause of anxiety, which I'd like to discuss in this training, is control. As you recall from my earlier definition, anxiety is a disempowered and stressed mental emotional state, coinciding with a lack of control, coupled with a strong desire to change it and an inability to do so effectively. Control. Where are my control freaks? Wanting control where you don't have it is probably the leading cause of general anxiety, and probably the most often overlooked and unrecognized. It's the root of all roots we have discussed previously. For example, worry is the mind's failed attempt to control the future, which hasn't even happened yet, so therefore it does not exist. Now, how can you control something which does not exist? Obviously you can't. Hence, anxiety. What about regret? In regret, we are regurgitating the past and wishing it were different. Wishing of any kind is a hopeless strategy. It's a fantasy which children often engage in, which has absolutely no bearing or influence on anything whatsoever. When you wish upon a star, nothing happens. And in regret, we are attempting not only to control that which has no current reality in this moment, which is the past, but we're using a tool which lacks any potency whatsoever, except to create anxiety in us. So we falsely assume that if we beat ourselves up badly enough, that we won't make the same mistakes in the future. But this is nonsense, and it only serves to debilitate our confidence and our sense of self-worth. And when we lack self-confidence and self-worth, the actions we take will surely lead to results which are less than inspiring. So now that we understand the problem, what about the solution? We know that suppressing emotion leads to depression and potential psychosis. And trying to change our thinking alone is a hopeless endeavor, with modern neuroscience estimating that the average human being has about 40,000 thoughts per day. Good luck changing your thoughts. And by now it should be abundantly clear that any truly effective treatment for eliminating anxiety at its root is virtually unheard of. And this is why I created the Anxiety Destroyer program. So you can break free of your chains of bondage once and for all and boldly create the life that you want. It's a 6-module online training and coaching program, which is the most comprehensive, powerfully effective, and rapid methodology you will ever come across, for exposing, uprooting, and demolishing anxiety at its core that's on the market today. And it simultaneously gives you the ability to unleash your true, innate, and natural sense of confidence so that you can have the freedom to live joyfully in the moment, embracing opportunities and expressing your full potential. And when you complete the Anxiety Destroyer program, you'll be able to succeed at whatever you choose. And you'll leave that old anxious self in the past and never look back as you charge forward onto victory. You're probably wondering, well, how does this work? So instead of using the same ineffective strategies of trying to push through your anxiety, or worse yet, becoming overwhelmed and defeated by it, you'll learn powerfully effective techniques for releasing it. And you'll start to feel lighter and freer right from the start. In the very first module, you'll create a strong foundation of power, which will act as a springboard to launch you forward into a new version of yourself, one who is free from the burden of anxiety and can achieve his goals with ease. And in each subsequent week, you'll be developing the tools and the skills which will absolutely transform every area of your life. Plus, you'll have all the support you need to ensure your success with one-on-one and group coaching so that you'll never get stuck or fall by the wayside. And best of all, in a few short weeks, you'll look back at your old life and be amazed at how far you've come. If you'd like to find out more about this life-changing program and to see if you qualify to work with me, click the link below and schedule a call right now. You owe it to yourself to be free of anxiety, so you can finally start to live a life worth living. Thanks for watching, and I really look forward to speaking with you soon.